Hello and welcome to the Winter Fantasy Food Show in San Francisco, where I caught up with Greg Steltenpohl from Califia Farms. So the question of labelling conventions in the plant-based dairy category has reared its head again recently, with members of Congress urging the FDA to enforce standards of identity for milk and other dairy products. What's your perspective? Are consumers confused by almond milk?
Well, California is, first of all, both a dairy state and an agricultural state.
Yeah.
So our perspective really as both a company in which farming is a big part of our ownership. So we're very farm positive, would be a way of saying it, but we're also a company that's really faced towards the future of what consumer wants. So obviously we position Califia as a brand that is dairy free. So not only are we dairy free with our products, but the entire company. So the matter of positioning is extremely important to Califia, and we've had a huge amount of success by making sure that dairy free is on the front of all our packages. And we always use a modifier whenever the word milk is used. So we form almond milk together, or cashew milk, or coconut milk, all in one phrase. So in our estimation, the consumer has never been confused, and I think the growth of the category is simply a matter of, first, the trends have shifted from a free-from perspective, and I think the growth of dairy-free beverages has been supported by underlying trends that the consumer is looking for.
I mean, one thing is that if you put this point to the milk producers, they'll say, well, it's not so much that consumers think that almond milk comes from a cow. They probably don't think that. It's more a case of nutritional equivalency, that consumers might assume that almond milk is just as nutritious and that plant-based brands are kind of falsely advertising their brands as healthier.
Right.
Is there any merit in that argument? Or?
Well, we think that, first of all, the area of plant-based beverages is highly dynamic. And Califia itself has many products that have proteins that are nearly equivalent to cow's milk. And in fact, we'll be launching more extensions of those product lines that have full equivalency and beyond.
Yeah.
So I think more and more that's sort of a moot point, and I would say a few years from now, really the beverages and the positioning with, in particular, protein, which is, I think, what the dairy industry is calling out, is that in the early days of soy milks and the first almond milks, there was very little protein.
Yes.
And I think most of the modern producers are shifting, and by the end of this year, we'll probably have about 8 SKUs that actually all have substantial amounts of protein. For the consumer, I think the consumer was looking for 3 things. One, they're lactose intolerant, so they're looking for no lactose. And this emerging consumer has also been looking to lower calories without really manipulating the inherent pure nature of the product. So one of the challenges, is that the industry, the dairy industry, can remove fats and calories, but they're really reworking the product. And I think, more and more the modern consumer is looking for that wholesome, pure type of milk. And I think there's a big future for the organic dairy industry in that regard, and that they represent that.
I mean, just going back to the legal kind of situation around these conventions, do you think that the FDA needs to step in and clarify the situation, or is the current kind of hands-off approach the right one in your view?
Right. Well, I think the FDA has not been fully hands-off. I mean, they've made some guidelines, and I think that the FDA will sort out its own sense of priorities in the midst of many other issues. I think food safety is probably the first thing this administration will be thinking about, as opposed to increasing regulation. But I'm not an expert on legislation. I think our perspective from Califia's point of view is just, I think the consumer has spoken. We're a proponent of consumer choice, and I think clear labeling is pretty much already present, and we go out of our way to make sure that it is.
So you, almonds obviously a key part of your proposition, but within the plant-based beverage set now, you've got rice, coconut, peas, hemp, nuts, flax, you name it. Are all these kind of equally exciting, or do some of them present, far bigger opportunities than others?
Well, we do think that legumes, for example, in combination with nuts, make a particularly attractive combination because you get the macronutritional profile and you still have the ability to have a very clean and neutral kind of taste profile, which is one of the main characteristics of milks. But for Califia, I think the future directions that you're talking about, for us, we're looking at increasing the nutrient density, in particular with proteins, but also from the way milks combine so well with other botanicals, for example. And I think in the history of the dairy industry, if you look back, they've tended to focus on things like maybe banana milk or chocolate milk or strawberry milk for children. And I think more as parents raise their children in a little more conscious way, they're looking for things that are not adding sugars but are adding true nutrients. And so that's more the future direction for us. And we think that's really interesting. And we think also there are different uses for milks. Milk-like substances, and the consumer uses them in smoothies. The consumer uses them as part of a coffee experience. And as we've discussed before, we think plant milks at least Califias have a very neutral profile that blend especially well with botanicals that have a strong kind of taste profile, like coffee or cardamom or matcha.
I was going to ask about that because you're into the creamers market, and when you first, maybe a few years ago, you tried pouring almond milk into a coffee, and it kind of coagulates and doesn't look too pleasant. What have you done such that no longer happens?
The dairy industry developed a lot of techniques over the years around how to create a smooth and consistent product that used to separate as well. And the same issues, happen with plants when you have fats, which are present in nut products, and especially coconut. So you have the emulsification requirements. So Califia has kind of distinguished itself by paying as much attention to innovating in process as it has just in terms of ingredients. So we start with the whole blanched raw almond as a point of difference. We don't use the cooked almond, and then we also have chosen to use a soaking process which gives it a more emulsified, smoother mouthfeel. So for the creamers, which you're asking about, a big innovation for us this year is a new type of processing which actually increases even beyond our first generation of creamers. That's smooth and kind of mixing quality with somewhat slightly acidic beverages like coffee. And in addition, we pioneered a new pour lid, which is for the first time a custom designed lid that allows the consumer to finely control the pour speed. So overall, there's a really organoleptic advancement, and there's a sort of natural feel to our products that we think engage the consumer in their kind of coffee creamer experience, which is an important part for everybody in the early morning.